All right, Dad, today is Wednesday, July 31st, and let's just jump right into what's happened over the past 24 hours. So, in the past 24 hours, Israel has struck Beirut and has struck Tehran.
Right.
And they're saying they're targeting, terrorist and Hezbollah official, and also they killed the head of the Hamas leadership political organization,
Right.
Ismail. I forget his name. Yeah. Okay. Well,
I think.
maybe can you break this down? What happened in both
Okay.
of these
Yeah.
incidents?
Well, first they struck Beirut. They've been bombing Lebanon. They pounding mostly southern Lebanon. Ever since the tragic incident in the Golan Heights. Which they use as an excuse um, to destroy a lot of Hezbollah assets. But yeah, most importantly, they they targeted and apparently killed Hezbollah's number two man, the number two man after Nasrallah. He was in a apparently he was in a building in Beirut, southern Beirut. They just took out the whole building, and along with him, there were several other people killed, at least including at least a couple of children. So, this was supposedly in retaliation for the tragedy, but it's just another tragedy. This wasn't a surgical strike by any means. They destroyed the entire building. So it's a yeah, another assassination. It's something that Israel does an awful lot of. And then following that, uh, they struck. They we have to say that Israel hasn't claimed responsibility for the assassination, but everybody assumes it was Israel. The Israelis, we can safely assume, targeted and killed, um, as you say, the political leader of Hamas.
Hmm. Is
Yeah, this is a man whose three sons and four grandchildren were killed in an Israeli strike earlier.
I
Actually,
believe
that
five
occurred.
grandchildren.
Okay, five grand. Yeah, I think you're correct. Right. Um, yeah, and that took place during previous negotiations. He was taking part in the negotiations. It clearly was an attempt to subvert, to sabotage the negotiations. And this may be too. I mean, look, if you're interested in trying to find some sort of solution, a diplomatic solution of any kind, you don't target the other side's leaders, right? It's clear this is a message that we're not interested. We're just going to destroy you. We're not talking. There's not going to be any ceasefire. All that ceasefire talk was never, I don't think it was ever serious on the Israeli side.
Right. So any chance of a ceasefire now is basically gone. You just
Yeah,
killed
I
the
don't think
only
it was ever
person that
there.
was they had of
Right,
negotiations. The
right,
leader that you're supposed to negotiate with. You killed his grandchildren. You killed his children. Now you killed him.
right.
Um,
And earlier,
I
they actually killed the negotiator himself in Lebanon. It was a Hamas leader that had been involved, that what had been negotiating. They killed him. So it's very blatant. They have no interest in these negotiations. We like to
hmm,
pretend over on this side, and occasionally, the Israelis will pretend that they're negotiating. But
right.
you don't do that if
What
you actually have any serious intention of achieving some kind of ceasefire. You just don't do that.
Right. But what's so infuriating is that, Israel and the U.S. media will just say that it's Hamas that's rejecting ceasefire deals that won't agree to peace in the
Yeah,
region. When Israel is killing the negotiators, bombing civilians, killing children, and
right,
then killing the head of Hamas itself, who you're supposed to be negotiating with.
right.
So it's just very
Yeah,
clear that there is no chance for peace between Hamas and Israel and or Gaza and Israel at all. That this is that they're going full steam ahead with
right.
this genocide.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
don't
can
think there was ever a chance, to be honest.
can you tell
Just
us a little bit about the person that they targeted in Hezbollah, the number two guy? I believe his name was it
I don't
Farouk.
know a whole lot about him. I think he actually one of his responsibilities is the missile systems that are actually so important to Hezbollah's military. Other than that, and the fact that he is described the number two man in the organization. I don't know, but obviously he's a very significant figure.
Well, did you see anything about that there was a $5 million bounty out
Yes, I
for
did.
this man,
Right.
and that he was responsible for the death of 230 plus U.S. servicemen on an attack on
Right.
a U.S. military base. I don't know
I
how long
remember
ago, it was
that
15,
attack.
20
Yeah,
years.
I think that was back in it was in the early 1980s. It may have been 82 or 83, something like that.
So that long ago. So this guy was responsible for that attack that
That's
happened
what they're saying now.
over
Clearly
40 years ago?
right. He's been around for 40 years. So to bring that up now, I think is ludicrous. If they were really, dead set on taking that guy out, I think he would have been taken out sometime during the last 40 years, right? That's 40 years ago. It's the same thing. It's like kind of going after Jimmy Carter now for some bombing he did, in the 1970s or something, right? It doesn't make any
So
sense.
So 40 years ago, was this guy actually involved? Is there any evidence and proof of this? Like,
I
what
I don't know.
was he a
That's the claim.
leader that long ago?
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
that
that's a
was
long
about
time.
around the time that Hezbollah was actually just kind of taking shape. It was really very close to the founding of Hezbollah, according to my understanding. It hadn't been around very long. Um, and yeah, it was a major incident. What happened is that this was following the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. The U.S. actually sent Marines. Reagan was president at the time, and they actually sent Marines in as peacekeepers. Was the idea? I don't think it was ever really thought through very clearly. Um, and a suicide bomber took out a whole barracks, and approximately 230 Marines were killed. Now, interestingly, again, Reagan, who's held up as this uh, kind of this steely-jawed, right, figure, the guy who who knows how to deal with the Mideast fanatics, the guy who it doesn't pussyfoot around, but it knows to
No
strike hard. And,
nonsense.
right, no nonsense. Right. Okay, maybe that's the best way to describe it. Well, he looked at the situation and he decided, hey, this doesn't make any sense. We're just hunkering down here. What's the point? Let's get out. And that's what he did, right? Which I think was perfectly sensible. You don't double down when you make a mistake. You say, okay, we'll turn around and go back. This was a mistake. But yeah, it was a major incident 40 years ago, better than 40 years ago. If somebody brought this up now, it was just a way to garner some sympathy from the U.S. public because, there's still a memory of that incident among Americans of a certain age, like myself. But I don't think it had anything to do with this. That doesn't make sense to me. Clearly this was, actually, I don't think it had anything to do with, obviously, with the tragedy in Golan Heights either. This was just clearly an effort to escalate, to provoke a response. It's just part of Netanyahu's old game of trying to bring Iran in and create a larger regional war. I think that's what it's all about.
Right. And the same thing with the attack in Iran. You hit Tehran, the
Yeah.
capital. First of all, can you tell us how that was done? Like, do we have any
I
idea
don't know.
on what the missile was?
Yeah, I have, right. They just say a missile, and I haven't seen any more information on that. So I'm just wondering. Maybe it was fired from a drone, or I don't know.
Right, just because I find that a little bit fishy because when Israel did its retaliatory response to Iran's attack for Israel's attack on
Right, right.
the Iranian embassy in Lebanon, um, it was nothing. It seemed like they didn't have the missile technology or capability to launch missiles from Israel into Iran.
Right.
At least that's what it appeared, and there was just some kind of small drone. And here you have, they say, claim a missile strike, a very targeted, very
Right.
guided missile that was
Really
able
precise,
to very precise, to pinpoint prick. And as far as I could see, it would just killed Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, and his bodyguard. Nobody else.
Right.
So you're telling me that they have this ability to strike from this far away, but there's no information really regarding going about this
Yeah,
missile. But at the same time, the most moral army in the world, the IDF, isn't able to prevent civilian casualties in Gaza. They just drop dumb bombs when they clearly have the precision to launch a missile, they're saying, from thousands of miles away, and to
right.
go straight into Iranian
Yeah,
airspace, into Tehran, most populated city in Iran, and kill just the leader and his bodyguard.
yeah,
But we
right.
can't, but we
Well,
got to just
yeah. I doubt that the
drop dumb
missile,
bombs on Gaza.
right. I doubt that the missile was fired from Israel. I think it was probably fired from the air, close to Iran,
Mm.
if not actually in Iranian airspace. But I don't know how that was done. I don't know. One thing is Tony Blinken denied any U.S. involvement because I guess automatically there's some suspicion. Now, of course, the U.S. has done assassinations, or one in particular, Soleimani, right? And that was done by a drone. So the U.S. clearly has the capability to do something like that. I don't know if Israel does. Maybe they do, but I don't know how they got the drone there. Again, it kind of does raise some
With
eyebrows.
U.S. help?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think probably it was, an Israeli aircraft or drone, but there may very well have been U.S. help. For example, if it was Israeli aircraft, they may have, the aircraft may have been refueled by a U.S. Tanker of some kind.
Or launched from a U.S. Airfield potentially
Yeah,
in the
that's
Middle
it.
East.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah, again, we had zero information, but like you, yeah, I was wondering how they could do this. Maybe we'll find
I
out
mean,
somewhere
but
down the road.
are there sections of the Pentagon and our military and industrial complex that are rogue that would just be able to say, like, we're going to, we're backing Israel, that they're essentially part of the IDF almost, that they're just like, we're going to give Israel what they need? I mean,
Well, I
like,
think
could they do something like this without the authority? Like, well, who in the State Department or in the Pentagon would say, like, okay, we'll let Israel, use our airstrip or refueling to carry out this
right.
assassination against somebody that the United States, that the current administration desperately wants a ceasefire deal. They would love it if Israel would say, like, instead of trying to kill this guy, sit down, talk to him, stop the
Right.
bloodshed, so it
Right.
stops making it look so bad for us.
Right. Right.
Why would the United States doesn't want this to happen,
Yeah.
except certain neocon
Yeah. Right.
individuals that want to
Right.
go to war with Iran?
Yeah. No, there are
Like,
obviously a lot of people in the Pentagon and, in the Congress and the State Department that are itching for war with Iran. And this has been true for a long time. These people have been kept at bay over the past couple of decades, but they're there. They're always there, and they're always looking for a chance. Um, I wouldn't say like there's parts of the let's say U.S. power structure that are under the control of the IDF. It's almost like a good like basically the whole thing is it's an exaggeration to say under the control of the IDF, but it's all IDF influence and there are IDF connections throughout the system. We saw that in the run up to the Iraq War with Wolfowitz, for example, and who's the other guy? Yeah, but anyway, they were dual citizens that were involved that were absolutely instrumental in bringing about the Iraq War. Um, and then what we have in the Congress, we have these congressmen marching around in the IDF uniform. It's not like the influence of the IDF is being hidden. It's there. It's
hmm.
throughout the power structure. But yes, it's there still is that resistance. Up to a point. Yeah, we'll do whatever you want, but please no war with Iran. There still are you know, those people. The cooler heads are still in the majority, but maybe just barely. Now, so I don't know. So, the question was, did somebody go rogue? I hope, well, I don't know that we've reached that point. But I, if we haven't, I think maybe one day we'll see that. Who knows?
Right. Well, I mean, maybe it doesn't even really matter at this point. I think Iran and Hezbollah will retaliate, right? They've both said they would. What does this mean now? Is this the beginning? Is this what Netanyahu always wanted, right?
Right.
He wants a reaction, and now this is good. He might get it this
Yeah.
time.
I think, yeah,
But
that's right. This is kind of remember back in, I guess it was April, probably the beginning of April, when Israel struck the consular building, the Iranian consular building, in clear violation of international law, and killed um, those Iranian generals. And then Iran just had to respond. Well, we came very close to an all-out conflict, but we just narrowly averted it, right? It was a very carefully
Mm.
calibrated response. Um, but at the time, I remember us saying that, it's going to happen again. It's not like Netanyahu said, "Oh, damn, I failed. Well, I guess that doesn't work. We'll do something else." No, he's going to try it again. That's what I thought back then. And here he is. I think we just see the second attempt to light the fire, to start a
And so,
regional war.
right. I mean, we keep on striking the tinderbox,
Right.
and to get sparks, and it's going to catch eventually. Do you
I,
think that it's caught right now? Like, do you expect a retaliation from Hezbollah and Iran? Do you think that they will strike within Haifa, Tel Aviv, in the
it's
next couple of
yeah,
weeks?
it's hard to know. That these are actually Hezbollah and Iran. In contrary to what so many Americans think, they're not wild-eyed fanatics. They're actually very sane, very rational people, and they're in a very difficult position. You can see there is a need to retaliate, right? You say these deeds can't go unpunished. It shows weakness if we don't respond. That's what they got to be thinking. But at the same time, they really don't want an all-out war because they know what it could mean. It can mean the destruction of Lebanon. The Israelis keep on saying, I remember them saying this way back in the previous, maybe it was back in 2006 or earlier. We're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age, and that was a threat. And they did a great deal. They didn't quite do that, but they did a great deal of damage. A great deal of devastation. In Iran is a country that survived a horrible war, the Iran-Iraq War, millions of dead on their side, and then it's been subject to all these sanctions. And it's just only recently that they have begun to turn the corner, and their economy is starting to grow. People have some hope in the future. They don't want to have an all-out war, right? So they are in a very difficult position. And we'll see how they calibrate the response. Maybe they'll manage to avert one again. And oddly enough, the U.S. might be an ally, just as they were actually in the previous incident. If you remember, it was actually the Iran communicated to the U.S. ahead of time. We're going to do this. We're not going to strike military targets. It's a kind of a show of force, but it's not a real attack. Okay, understand that there was actually communication between the U.S. and Iran, because the U.S. also does not want an all-out war, and we may see the same thing happen again.
Yeah, we keep on saying that, but I just don't understand why we can't just say no to Israel. Why can't we
Yeah,
just
I
say,
know.
just stop?
Well,
Just,
it's right.
it's so frustrating.
Right.
We play all these
Yeah,
complicated, dangerous games,
right.
and when the easiest solution
Right.
is just stop.
Right.
Just stop.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And what kind of ally? Israel is often incorrectly described as an ally. We don't have any kind of treaty with them, mutual defense treaty. But we describe them as an ally. But what kind of ally is always bringing you to the brink like this? Israel clearly is not an asset for the U.S. in the Middle East. It's a terrible liability. But we're you know this is the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. today, and not just today, but for the last few decades. The
Right.
tail wagging
Yeah,
the
I
dog.
mean, I feel like it's only the United States really that is, fully backing Israel, and the rest of the world is hating us for it because of what we're allowing Israel to
Yeah, I
do.
think you would have to also
And
say
it's,
Britain, Germany, and
yeah,
most of the Western European countries
I
to some extent,
I
but not
feel it's
fully, not quite like we are.
right. I feel it's different in Western Europe because I think most of the people in Western Europe don't have that same
Right,
support.
right,
There's not that Christian Zionism that exists.
exactly. Yeah,
That's a U.S. phenomenon. And
right,
so and the
right,
U.S. is the Western Europe follows what the U.S.
yeah,
does. So it's just
right,
that's what it
and
is. They're just at the trough, the U.S. trough as well, and so they'll just listen to what we
right.
say,
In the U.S., it's
and
Christian Zionism, but it's also Jewish influence, Jewish money. That it's obviously not all Jews that we're talking about, but Jewish Zionism is a very, very powerful force, and more powerful in the U.S. than any Western European country. So it's both of those kind of Zionisms. Yeah, to give an example that supports what you just said, there was a poll that came out recently, and it showed that in the UK, actually support for the Palestinians was almost exactly equal to support for Israel within the population. There's maybe better than half of just don't take sides, but perhaps 20% were for pro-Palestinian, 20% pro-Israel. Now in the U.S., it's more like 30% or 32% versus 8% or something, or maybe 30 to 10. There's a very That's actually an improvement over past years. There is a growing support for Palestine that hardly exists at all, but it's still very much. But then when you get to Europe, and I think probably like the UK is probably one of the most pro-Israel countries in Western Europe. Most other countries, that clearly I think it would be the support for Palestine. It far exceeds the support for Israel. I noticed actually the same survey was done in Russia, and support for Palestine was much stronger in Russia than support for Israel. And I think it was something like 4-1 in favor of Palestine.
Yeah, I think a big part of this is that as Americans, we've been kind of conditioned to view Muslims and Arabs as terrorists. And that's kind of that's basically the message that I grew up with as a kid, going through 9/11 and then the 20 years of this war on terror, this idea that these Muslims are terrorists. And I see that often when I post little clips of our videos. That's often a big response that gets responded like, oh, these are just terrorist countries. We need to teach them a lesson. They're attacking Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself from terrorists and terrorism. And that's the messaging that's going out constantly. And it's so ingrained in our psyche that it's very difficult to combat. So how would you respond to that type of messaging?
Well, first of all, I'll say, look, there's well over 1 billion Muslims in the world. And they're a large and varied group. The actual terrorists, the Sunni extremists, Islamists, are a very small minority. Now they're real. So Islamic terrorism is a real thing. It's a real problem. I'm not pretending that it isn't. But actually, the victims, probably the most common victims of Islamic terrorism, are not Americans or Western Europeans, but other Muslims. A lot of Muslims themselves have suffered at the hands of these people. Now look at Syria. I mean, we had al-Nusra and ISIS there, and well, guess who was supporting al-Nusra? It was the good old US of A. We had another Al-Qaeda, I think it was Al-Qaeda in the Yemeni Peninsula, and for at least a while in the Yemen war, guess who was supporting it? The good old US of A, right? So this notion that somehow we're opposed to Islamic terrorism is actually blatantly false. We've talked about how actually the U.S. has a long history of using Muslim extremists, and so does Israel. Israel is actually, like in Syria, in fact, what treated al-Nusra, al-Nusra is really the local Al-Qaeda outfit there in Syria. They treated wounded al-Nusra soldiers and sent them back into Syria to continue fighting. So yeah, Islamic terrorism of a certain kind is a problem. But again, we're not actually, I think you could make a better case that organizations like Hezbollah or a country, a government like the Iranian government, these are organizations, forces that have been consistently opposed to this kind of terrorism and have often, suffered at the hands of it. We don't. I guess a lot of the people have this black and white view, which is that innocent Americans and evil Muslims. Okay, there are some. Now, if you're over in the Muslim world, yeah, if you're an average Muslim, you probably can't stand these extremists, these ISIS types. You consider them your enemy, and Muslims have fought them, and a lot of Muslims have been killed by them, right? But you look at the world and you see, well, who's killing us? Yeah, it's ISIS, but it's also Israel. It's also the U.S. They've done even more damage to us than ISIS. I'm sorry, but we've got blood on our hands. And yeah, in the Muslim world has Again, it's a large and varied place. And if you can't paint it with a broad brush and just describe all these people as extremists, that's an easy excuse. It's a lazy way of thinking, and it leads to horrible results. You got to stop and look and understand what's going on. These people aren't all the same, right? It may be easy. Maybe you don't understand it, so you just say, "Yeah, kill them all." That's not that's not the way to go about it. Understand who are Shia, who are Sunni, who are the jihadists, and who are the secularists, and so on and so forth. It's important to know who you're dealing with and to act appropriately. The average American citizen doesn't. He assumes they're all the same. They all have turbans. They're all crazy. They all want to kill them. That's just utterly false. Now, the people in the CIA, they know what's going on, but they're just extremely cynical, and they use those extremists to achieve their objectives, and often with the result that many normal Muslims die.
And I guess the one, this terrorist act that goes through that maybe was supported by the CIA or Mossad utilizing these terrorist groups, then they can easily paint the whole group. Look, they're all terrorists. That's just what Muslims do. They're terrorists, and that kind of feeds into that narrative. Yeah, I don't think it's something that is going to be easily dispelled, because the problem is most people don't want to take the time to actually learn these things and to understand what the region is like. I mean, for me, someone that's talked to you about these things, that have been to Palestine, I've been to Jordan, and even for me, it's complicated. I don't want to say that I understand.
I understand something about it, but it's infinitely complex. It's a very, it's a large part of the world with, a long history, and so let's not get, let's not again paint it with a broad brush. That's just again a way of a sure road to failure and to disaster, and that's that's what we've seen. Well, I just want to talk about the ignorance of Americans. I think the most famous example is George W. Bush. Like, he never understood the difference between Sunnis and Shia. He went ahead and invaded this country, right? And he didn't know a thing about it. And the result was a disaster, right? It was a disaster. Maybe 1 million people dead, millions and millions of refugees. That's what happens when you don't bother to understand, the people that you decided to make an enemy.
Right. The scary thing is people are so quick to pass judgment and make a decision online without having any knowledge, thinking about the consequences of pushing for something like this. Like seeing these people say, "Yeah, they're just terrorists. We got to blow them all up and make a big crater out of the Middle East." It's such a crazy way of thinking, and I just wonder, how do people get to that state where you can just be so nonchalant and to say,
well, I mean,
is it part of the problem?
A lot of people, first of all, just have very little experience of dealing with, actual Muslims or even people from foreign countries. It's especially true within the U.S., right? And so it's just easy to present some sort of caricature of those people.
Right. Actually, I was thinking that as well. I think a big problem with the United States is that people in America, they don't travel very much out of the country. No, we don't learn another language. We don't actually learn about other cultures, even though we try to say that we're all about diversity and learning about other cultures, but we're very isolated. We export our music and film around the world, so everybody else understands, gets kind of an idea of what America's about, but Americans have very little idea about the rest of the world. And I'm realizing that more and more now that I'm back, because I've spent the most of my adult life outside the United States and interacting with people. And I come back and I just realize people here just don't understand the world. And that's a big problem. And we are so propagandized through our media as well that they just have this distorted view, and it's very hard to break through. Of course, that's why we're doing this podcast, to kind of slowly break through, and hopefully people will start to learn. And I really encourage everybody that can to travel, get outside of the United States and see that it's actually not that scary out there. It's places like China. I mean, like you're going to Russia tomorrow. Is that right? You're going to Moscow. You're going to Moscow tomorrow. I lived in Shanghai for 10 years. People think both of these places, like, oh my God, they're so awful. They're terrifying. I'm back in the U.S. and I'm like, why did I leave China? That's exactly. I'm like, I did it. And so, I mean, I just America, it's not what people think it is. And the rest of the world isn't what America thinks it is either. People are just good people everywhere in the world, and most people are happy, and people in China and Russia aren't constantly feeling like they're oppressed. Actually, I feel more free in China than I do in the United States. I know that's going to make people go crazy and blow their minds, just, but it's true. Like, I don't fear the cops in China like I do here, or, making sure I filed something wrong on my taxes in China as I do here. Like, I feel the government in the United States, or just this censorship almost here in the United States. That am I allowed to talk about these subjects because all of a sudden I'm having an opinion that is not sort of accepted by the mainstream if I show sympathy to the Palestinians, or if I talk about the atrocities that Israel's committing. You feel like that I'm crossing a red line, and I feel like this is only a feeling you get in the United States. And that's weird. This is supposed to be the land where you have free speech and you can do what you want, but I honestly don't feel as liberated in my speech here in the United States as I do in other countries. Because everybody I meet in the United States, I have to feel like kind of feel out what your positions are on things, because otherwise I might have offended you because I don't have the same worldview as you have, because everybody's so polarized in the United States. It's not like that in countries like Russia or China. And it's not because Russia and China are saying you're only allowed to have this one point of view. The fact of the matter is that life is actually pretty good for people in those countries, and they don't have as much to complain about. I think that's a big part of it. Obviously there are dissidents and people that are upset, and no government is perfect, but overall, I look at living in China for 10 years. My sister lives in Moscow. You're heading there now. I feel like they're running their countries better, and that the idea that these countries don't have any freedoms is just absurd. Go travel there, go visit there, go live there. I lived in China for 10 years. It's not this awful communist country that everybody wants to make it out to be. It's really strange.
It was 1986. So it was, probably roughly 7 or 8 years after Deng Xiaoping took power and instituted the reforms, the opening, globalization. But it was still, the old Maoist ways hadn't died out, and you just felt it in the air. And people were careful about what they said. They tell you something, they're going to tell you something that might be sensitive. They look around, look over their shoulders, and then tell it to you in a whisper. It was that way back then. Okay, you could see the vestiges of totalitarianism. And I remember too how people would, there were these loudspeakers everywhere that telling people what to do, like time to get up, time to exercise, time to go to work, and you see people marching down the sidewalks. It's completely different now, as you know. I mean, when I went back there, many years later, I found it was completely. First of all, we met people, and they would start complaining about things, complaining about their government, complaining about this or that, very loudly. Nobody worried about, expressing the wrong opinion. And like you said, it almost seemed like people were freer in their opinions, and they didn't worry about a reaction from you or whatever. And then people are starting their own businesses, and there's just clearly just a lot of, everybody has its own life, and it's no longer the loudspeakers telling them what to do. They're just doing their own thing. It was a completely different world. A lot of people still, I think, it seems like these old impressions, these old views of a nationality, or they die slowly, and they often like 20, 30, 40 years out of date. And I think it's similar for Russia. Actually, people still have ideas about the Soviet Union that they apply to current day Russia. And then also about the 90s, which was a terrible time in Russia. I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, yeah, like the life expectancy of a man in Russia is like 55. Well, that was true in the 1990s. It was true. But it's not true anymore. It's not close to being true anymore. Russia has undergone a tremendous transformation.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really true that I think you hit on a key thing when you said just that your ability to have just opinions and express them I feel like they're being suppressed here in America. Like there are opinions that will get you, not essentially canceled, but people will de facto cancel you. Will call you names, don't associate with this person. Like if you have a dissenting view on the, Ukraine-Russia war. If you want to have the view that, like, I want peace, let's stop killing, instead of sending more and more money and supplies to the Ukrainians who don't even want to fight this war, and just let them all die, to every last Ukrainian. Apparently that is the moral position to take here in the United States. You try to adopt another position.
Actually, division between the red states and the blue states. I mean, within the Democratic Party, I believe there's not a single dissenting vote on funding for Ukraine. Not a single one. Which I still find to this day bizarre. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that. But on the Republican side, there actually is significant dissent. So you do have people with both opinions. So you have to be careful. You talked about some people; they're very fervent Ukraine supporters on the Republican side too. But you will have people saying, "No, let's not send another candidate."
Right. But the support isn't that, like, nobody wants to. Very few people want to talk about the causes of the war and the nuances of what are giving autonomy to the Ukrainian people themselves, to say, like, instead of the whole coup and forcing this war upon them. I feel like the position is like, we can just agree that Putin's a terrible man, but we need to care about
I think you're probably
That's the position.
Right, exactly.
They don't even want to really follow the solution. So if you try to offer the other solution, like, well, let's look at it from the Russian point of view, then that's no, you can't do that. I think it's important to look at it from both sides. And then once you look at the Russian point of view, you're like, wait, that one makes way more sense. Now why are we supporting this Nazi regime in Kiev?
We talked about that earlier. I guess in the context of Palestine and Israel, it's saying that to actually really take on Zionism directly, it's just too much. It's just such a powerful force. So the best you can hope for is like, let's worry about our own problems. But you still have to say, of course, Hamas are terrorists and Israel is the greatest country on earth. That's like the only allowable kind of opinion of the one that says, let's put ourselves first. But of course, everything you said about those terrible Ruskies and Palestinians.
Right. China's bad.
That's all true.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All these. Right. We have to say, like, I agree, China's terrible, Russia's terrible, the middle Palestinians, Arabs are terrorists, are terrible, but we should focus on what it's at home. Like, that's the best compromise we can get, which is just, I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me either, because as somebody that knows these things a little bit deeper, that's like, no. Maybe that's the best we can hope for.
It definitely can't do any better.
Okay. Let me take it back a little bit to what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine. So, what would you tell people that are living in Israel right now? What would you tell people living in Haifa, Tel Aviv, and throughout Israel? Like, is it time for them? Like, how worried should they be? Because this is also what I've been concerned about as well. Is just like, I see things on Twitter where people are in Haifa and saying, like, oh, I'm worried about my family here, and I have a little kid, and and I'm like, maybe I think you should get out. That's what I'm saying, because I don't see this ending well. And if you really want to take care of your family, then I think it's time to get out of there. Unless you can convince your government to stop the bloodshed right now.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that
I don't know. What do you say?
Just get out of there. And quite a few already have voted with their feet. It's at least 500,000, which is a very large percentage. Because Israel is not a big country. We're talking about 5% of the population or more. That figure was from several months ago, so it might be quite a bit higher now.
Right. And, I think the population of Israel is around 9 million, but 2 million of those are Arabs. So we're talking about maybe 7 million Jews.
More, it's closer to 10%.
Right.
That's very significant. I mean, that's a huge outflow, immigration.
I think another problem that Israel has is, just from what I see on social media, is they have created their own bubble, and I think they're buying into their own propaganda, which is very dangerous. We saw this happen with the Ukraine-Russia war, that they just believe that
Right.
we're invincible.
Right.
We got the U.S. behind our
Yeah. Well, I
back. We
think
could
it's a
do
problem
whatever
with the
we
U.S.
want.
too.
And
I mean, when you're really good at propaganda, okay, yeah, you can score points on the international media stage. But the danger is you can actually convince yourself that what you're saying is true. And maybe that's why you're so good at it, because you really believe it. And that's, you know, then
mm,
that could spell real trouble. I mean, that's, as you can say, yeah, I think clearly that's happening in Ukraine. There are a lot of people who were convinced, a year ago that Ukraine was bound to win, that the Russians were disorganized, that the whole society was about to collapse, Putin was going to be overthrown, the Russians would run out of shovels and refrigerators or whatever it was that they were using to maintain their
mm,
war effort. That's the way they talk. They mock them. And there was this sense of invincibility. And now I think it's starting to get through that no, but there's still, they've gone so far down this road. They've already hundreds of thousands of people died needlessly, and it's very very hard to really confront and admit what you've done at this point. Uh, that's the kind of mistake that
mm.
people have a lot of trouble admitting to.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of the problem is like when I see these stats that like 90% or it's something like 98% of Israelis believe that, we're not doing enough, going hard enough against the
I haven't
Gazans. Do
seen
you have the stats on that?
98%, but I mean, it was
I
quite,
forget
I
what it
think the
was.
last time, last time
Sorry,
I
that was something
saw
different.
it was close, it was very high. It's like 80% or something. That's what I recall. But, who knows? It's just, without a question, there is a solid majority that thinks that what you say is true. That, again, that they're not doing enough. They're not being harsh enough. They're actually, they got to take the gloves off, as though they hadn't taken the gloves off already.
Right. This is what's crazy. So, but this to me means is that most the biggest danger now for Israeli society is that they've just bought into their own propaganda that they are invincible, and they have the propaganda was effective enough to completely dehumanize and denigrate the Palestinians and the Lebanese, all Arabs in the area, to make them basically non-human terrorists. And it's been so effective that they are going that they have convinced themselves that they can just wipe them out with impunity without any type of consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so dangerous because I see this all the time on Twitter, these really prominent, and I know they're really smart people that are tweeting these things, like this Dr. Eli David that is, like deep machine learning smart guy. He's always posting on Twitter like pictures of just Gaza just destroyed and like Lebanon is next,
Right.
Beirut. Yeah, this is what you mess around. This is what you're gonna find out. Like with just this idea that like it's okay to just level a city of 1 million people and just destroy all of them because we're invincible and you guys are evil
Right.
terrorists. They're all bad, and
Right.
think that there's going to be no type of reaction. And then you realize that the majority of the Israeli civilian
Right.
population believes that as well. That most of them, like I said, 80% or so, are like, yeah, we're not going hard enough. We need to do it. We're invincible, and we got the
Right.
U.S. backing us up. And it's just they believe it so much because you see it on Twitter, you see it on that they all are just circle jerking each other like Israel is the best. Yeah, we're going to destroy everybody. Don't mess with us. And they feel like they have to project that dominance. And there's no voice of reason coming and saying like, hey, if you do this, something bad might happen. That it doesn't seem to break
Yeah.
through the until I think it's going to be too late, and
Yeah. No, I
that
think
might
so.
be happening soon.
There's really no
I just
opposition to speak of in Israel. There used to be. I mean, it was always small, but there was a significant, though small, dissident community. Now it's just there are individuals you can point to, people like uh, oh, well, I'm terrible with names, but yeah, there are. I think Gideon Levy is. Forgive me if I mispronounce his name, but yeah, I know
well, if
exactly.
you're reaching that far
Well, no,
back
I
in your
mean the
memory
guy's still
bank, then
around,
that
but
proves
we're
your
just talking
point.
about individuals now. That not even communities.
Mm,
Haaretz is the left wing paper in Israel, and I follow it. But even there, you just don't see the recognition of the genocide. I'll give you an example. The sort of thing, it seems it's really very surface phenomenon. Like there's a lot of hand wringing about these recent incidents. I don't know if you saw them. I think there was a sort of right-wing militias that went to a detention facility and started pounding on the door to get these soldiers, IDF soldiers that had been detained because they had sexually abused Palestinians. Right.
Yeah, gang raped hostages to the
Right.
point that they had to be
Horrible,
hospitalized.
horrible things. Right.
That's what I heard. And right, and they were so upset that these IDF soldiers had to go in detention and be detained for raping these hostages, these Palestinian prisoners, that they
Right.
rioted to break them out.
Yeah.
Right, that's what is that. And then they
Yeah.
were let out.
Yeah.
Right, they were let out from
Yeah.
what
And
I
then I think
saw.
you had somebody in the Israeli Knesset actually saying that no, we should clearly we should allow our soldiers to sodomize Palestinian prisoners. Yeah. Right. Non-Jews. Right.
Non-Jews. Right. That I've been seeing that it's like,
Right.
well, it's
Right.
not forbidden, to rape
Right.
non-Jews. Like that's crazy. Like that even
Right.
discourse is
Yeah. Again, this
allowed
is a
in a
member of the
society.
Knesset too.
But
Right. Right.
this
Right.
is right. This is the member of your parliament saying like,
Right.
yeah, of course we can
Right.
rape if
Right.
they're not Jewish, rape them. They're not human.
Yeah.
Like
So,
that's the
right.
mentality that
Right.
is
Now,
pervaded
now you got
into Israeli society. Those are
right.
your
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian values
Yeah.
right there.
Um,
You know?
And now, yeah, the reason I brought this up is that Haaretz was upset about this. Say, okay, look, we're losing control. We're no longer a society of laws. We can't have just these right wing gangs come and pound on the walls and just without any respect for procedure and for authority. For duly constituted authority. But and they're right about that. But this is a horrible thing. But it's actually just sort of a little minor um, sideshow. I mean, the main thing is what's going on in Gaza, and I read a lot of these articles, and he just said they just won't come to terms with the horror of what's being done. I mean, they're sort of like, yeah, let's we want to keep our institutions strong or whatever, but in their world, yeah, they can keep their institutions strong and they can act.
It looks like I lost you. Well, I'm just looking, it's a good conversation, but I don't think it's recorded since you've left. At least my side has recorded. Your side has not been recording, it looks like. So, okay, well, we'll end it here now, but I think it will have cut off 10 minutes ago, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. All right. Well, we'll see. Okay. All right, I'll let you go, Dad. Bye-bye.